Good morning, Year 11, and this recording is going to focus on English Literature Paper 2, Section A, which is DNA, and on the character of Phil. Phil would be a great essay question to get. I think he came up in 2022. There's always a chance that it will come up again this year. Last year it was Leah. So it's unlikely that we see a question with Leah. But remember, whatever questions come up, and you get a choice of two, not one, whatever questions come up, I always feel that if you can write about Phil, it's going to help you hit that grade 7 or above mark, because so much of the best lines and the best action in the play are linked to Phil. Remember that the marks on offer for DNA are 30 plus 4. The plus 4 aspect is the SPAG. Okay, so it's really important that this essay that you write is accurate and academic in tone. Now, you're never really just given the question, explore how Dennis Kelly presents Phil. Yeah, the question is very specific to give you the focus, because it is hard in 40 minutes to decide what to cover in an essay. If you're going for a grade 7 or more, you've really got to be precise in what you choose. So this question, explore how Dennis Kelly presents Phil as manipulative. Obviously, the key word is manipulation, okay? And so the essay should be based around this. But like with all literature essays, you've got to have that thesis statement. You've got to be clear about whether Phil is manipulative throughout the play, whether he is a victim of the modern society he's part of, whether there's a vulnerable side to him. I personally feel that the better essays always show the multifaceted nature of a character. So try to show on a question of Phil of manipulation, for example, where there is perhaps some good in him or some morals in him or some vulnerability. You'll see in the answer that I give you on this that I focus on the vulnerability. So let's see what kind of things we would cover in this essay. So the first thing is to consider the wider conceptual understanding of Phil. So when we think about Phil, we think about Darwin's theory of evolution. He really is the embodiment of the idea of the survival of the fittest. He will stop at nothing to ensure that he is completely removed from responsibility for Adam's death. And to some extent, in the first part of the plan, the rest of the group. So you could argue that, that perhaps that is a virtue in Phil. Remember, the beauty of literature is you can argue things that might seem a little bit tenuous or a little bit out there, but it's often those really sort of interesting, perceptive, thoughtful ideas that see you move quite high up the mark scheme. The stage directions in the play DNA are so important, and they're very much the methods part of the question. How does Kelly do it? Well, he does a lot of Phil's character through stage directions, and the stage directions of constantly eating and Phil saying nothing really cast Leah out. That is how he manipulates us. So looking at stage directions is important. He's very composed and he controls his emotions when directing the group. He addresses Kathy first when articulating his plan, which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because, Kathy is the ultimate follower. She almost sort of puts Phil sort of in this sort of hero figure. She nods at him when he comes up with the second plan. Obviously, the language that Kelly chooses to use for Phil, Kathy, Danny, Mark, you go to Adam's house, you break in. Yeah, very, very laden with imperatives, commanding, which fits into that idea of a manipulative, coercive leader. He's very direct and he lacks care and consideration for authority. You never see Phil waver around the moral or the lack of morals in his decision to frame the postman, or whether the police will believe them. And Phil is intelligent. He doesn't say much, but when he does, he has a power over the group that John Tate really failed to manage. So when he says, I'm in charge, everyone is happier. The pronouns I'm, the everyone are really there to manipulate. He's able to make them think that he's created happiness in this most horrific plan. Now, I think Miss Charnock's going to do an extra recording around this idea of Freud, because Freud's theory of the human conscience is very, very interesting. It's something you'll study at A-level if you pursue psychology. And bringing it into an essay like DNA is fantastic at the top end, but you've got to be able to manage it well. So, it can't just be stuck in with no relevance, or even worse, as sometimes I've seen it, that Freud somehow is involved in the writing of DNA, which clearly he isn't. So don't say, Freud thinks Phil is the ego. That would be terrible. If you're unsure how to use the aspect of Freud, you must speak to your teacher to make sure you weave it in effectively. But essentially, Sigmund Freud was 20th century psychoanalyst who wrote that the human consciousness, the things that we do, is divided into three parts, and you've got the id, the ego, and the superego. Basically, those who are fully functioning in society have a balance. The ego is the bit that we would attach to Phil. So the id is the primitive side, very much seen as Kathy. The superego, the moralistic side, very much seen as Leah. And in the middle, you've got the ego. Now, the ego is the part of us that holds back on those sort of primitive desires that Kathy resorts to, where you weigh up the costs and benefits of doing them. Now, Phil is very much that person. He'll be sipping his can of Coke, weighing everything up before he comes out with his plan. It's the methodical, ordered side of our personality. And so Phil, as the ego, is the organiser. He weighs things up and he's methodical. Okay, so yes, it's nice to add in, but you've got to take care when you add that in. Okay.
Final mark given for converting it into.
When we're doing a question on a character, you've got to sort of mind map in a way, and this is where revision comes in, because you don't really have time to be doing this in an exam. Now, in literature, I like to personally have a piece of A3 paper, and if I was revising Phil, I'd have a mind map going, a really big one that had keywords to describe, key moments in the play, key quotes, and what I could say about them. That's how I would revise, okay? Because you can't sit there and spend 15 minutes doing that in the exam. If you get that question on Phil, you've got to go, right, okay. He's manipulative. Where do I see that? What quote? He's calculating. Where do I see that? What quote? He's scheming. Where do I see that? What quote? Oh, Miss said we've got to try and show the other side of the character so we can show that characters are multifaceted. Right, he's also quite vulnerable. He needs Leah at the end. She storms off. I'm going to look at that. And I'm also going to look at how he's direct and plain spoken. And I'm going to say, whilst that can be quite manipulative, it also seems to be quite a good thing, because he does get the people to do what's needed at that time. However immoral it is, you could see that the direct, plain-spoken aspect of Phil could be seen as both a good and bad thing. So I know there I've got enough to go on. And I know that realistically, I'm only going to be looking at maybe 3 key moments, because I've only got 40 minutes to write the essay. So I'm going to be looking at his emotional abuse of Leah, and the bit at the end when she leaves him and how he's left staring into the distance. I'm going to look at the plan. The plan is everything. Adam, Kathy, Mark, you go to that, that bit is crucial. I'm going to look at the decision to kill Adam and the placing the bag over Brian's head and the scheming that goes on there. And essentially, That's all I'm going to look at. Now, we've talked to you about taught inferences and the importance of them. Yeah. Taught inferences are everything for the grade 7. Okay. A taught inference is what we, the experts, say about some really important quotes. Literature is about being thoughtful, developed, insightful. And with the best will in the world, it is very hard to do that in 40 minutes without some really good preparation beforehand. So a taught inference is what the teacher gives you on that quote to learn, because they know by looking at grade 7, 8, and 9 papers that it is this level of analysis that is moving students into the top band. And this is where revision comes in, because if you do not learn these taught inferences, or 1, 2, 3 maybe, to put in your answer, there is a risk that you might only access grade 5 or 6. So the taught inferences, for example, on Phil is eating and stares into the distance. Phil eats an ice cream. I'm in charge, everyone is happier. Leah spits out the sweet in disgust and storms off. What's more important, one person or everyone? You'll see there that underneath that quote, I've been able to make 4 bullets. Now, if you can say more than one thing about a quote on one level, on another level, or this word could suggest and this word could suggest, you are developing an argument. Now, development is what we call band 5, and band 5 is tipping into that 7. That's where you've got to be at least. You've got to have that one quote where you can talk about the use of personal pronouns, collective pronouns, imperatives, declaratives, the symbol of the sweet. Yeah. Look at these. I'm not going to read each one out, but for me, I know that any answer, whether it's on gangs, power, feel, relationship, bullies, victims, I could probably put in that what's more important, one person or everyone. So I would learn the 4 things below on that. Yeah. I know that it'd be very, very unusual for a question that comes up where you couldn't write about the character of Phil. Hence why these 5 are either said by Phil, in the stage directions about Phil, or impact Phil. So I'd highly recommend that this slide is something that you practice revising, because if I see, for example, the quote, I'm in charge, everyone is happier, I'd want to see that you are saying that it's a declarative to create certainty and trust. The idea of the personal pronoun, I'm, setting Phil apart as a leader. The comparative adjective, happier, forces the audience to question happier to what? What came before this that was so horrific? Because what he's suggesting is the worst of the worst. The idea that it's a very much a sweeping statement. I'm in charge, everyone's happier. It could imply immaturity and inexperience. And the idea of the word charge points to a dictator style of ruling. The idea that's coming with a sense of force, that Phil is warrior-like. Now that is a paragraph in itself. That is that idea of squeezing a quote. So much juice out of that quote that would tip you into at least the grade 7. Even one done very well will do that. So this is a critical slide. So what does an answer look like then? Well, I've put together an answer that would get grade 7, okay? I wanted to show you an answer that is quite formulaic, that is a 7 because it ticks the boxes, okay? And quite often in literature, students will say, I don't know how to start it. Where do we do? Where do we do that bit? And I wanted to show an answer that doesn't cover masses, but what it does cover, it does it well, okay? So this is like a benchmark, 22 plus 4, edging towards that 8, but a safe 7. So explore how Dennis Kelly presents Phil as manipulative in the play DNA. So I start in the opening paragraph by showing my understanding of manipulation. Arguably, to be manipulative means to exercise immoral control or influence over a person or situation. And the construction of Phil's character, we see evidence of this through his abusive relationship with Leah. Then I wanted to recognise the playwright and what he wanted to do. Interestingly, the playwright says that in his play he wanted, quote, to create a world without adults and hold a mirror up to society, which arguably not only exposes the vulnerabilities and poor judgment of teens, but also the responsibility of adults to act as moral guides, very clearly dealing with the writer's intention there. Indeed, this is one of the reasons why Phil is such a manipulative and controlling character. Clearly, it was Kelly's intention in the construct of Phil to highlight that power can be destructive when used to manipulate and without any sense of adult supervision. Very clear what my argument is. Then there are 3 paragraphs. I look at Phil in his psychological treatment of Leah. And I talk about the silences. I'm not going to read it all. Talk about the silences. Notice the very judicious use of quotation. Not big, long bolt-ons, yeah? I put in silences there as a weapon. I talk about the Phil says nothing. I talk about his constant eating. And I talk about her killing a hamster. This idea of manipulation of Leah. I then go on and look at Phil's deviant and scheming side. So I'm trying to use words that link to manipulation. And I look at the plan to frame the postman for Adam's death. I use stuff about ego there, Freud's theory. I talk about Kelly's use of imperatives. I talk about the declarative language. I use the quotes, I'm in charge, everyone is happier. Kathy, Danny, Mark, you go to Adam's house. And I analyse them in the way that I've just said, in a taught inference way. Don't need to use more quotes than that because that hits the marker. But like any literature answer, I want to finish by showing that I understand that Phil is not one-dimensional. So I end with, yet there is a vulnerable side to Phil. Now, grade 4, 5, 6 students might not be able to see that a character is multidimensional, okay? Remember, a character is always a construct. It's not a real person. So they will just see one side of Phil and do that. I always feel that if you can show another side to a character in your final paragraph, you are being more thoughtful. So there's a vulnerable side when we learn through the stage directions that Leah spits out the sweet in disgust and storms off. That allows me to talk about what that sweet could symbolise. Yeah, the end of their childhood relationship. The fact that she spits it out. Her frustration and her disgust now at Phil. He tries to put his arm round her, but it doesn't work. First sign of affection from him. He also calls out her name Leah, which is the first time he ever does that. It's all too late. It shows that he's left it too late. And at the end, it says that he left staring into the distance, which suggests that perhaps that is the point of realisation and that he's suffering. There's so much you can say about Phil. That is a snapshot, but a snapshot can get you the grade. You've always got to know your pace, really. And one of the biggest questions I get asked is, how much do you need to write for a 7? Well, you can write 6 pages of utter rubbish, or you could write 2 pages that is absolutely bang on grade 9. It's your selection and your development of points that gets you the grade, not, I've got to write everything I know about Phil. Answer the question, use taught inferences, use judicious quotation, and keep a clear argument running through. And that will take you to that magic grade 7 point.